Welcome to the Ohio Adult Allies Podcast Season 2, where we are developing, inspiring, and empowering youth leaders. In this episode, we discuss youth-led programming before, during, and after the pandemic, the youth perspective.
Welcome to the Ohio Adult Allies Podcast. I'm your guest host for this podcast, and my name is Gina Crosby, and I'm the Prevention Coordinator for Youth and Young Adult Services at Prevention Action Alliance. So I work with the Ohio College Initiative and the Ohio Youth-Led Prevention Network. Specifically, I get to work with the amazing Youth Council of the Ohio Youth-Led Prevention Network, and I'm so excited to have two of our Youth Council members here with us today. So I'm going to pass it over to them to introduce themselves. So go ahead, Sam.
My name is Sam Arledge, and I'm a third-year member at OYLPN, as well as my home group too, the Pickaway County Community Foundation Youth Advisory Council, which is tied in with philanthropy and our PAC board, as well as I have a unique approach with working on the state's CTP contract for tobacco compliance.
And I'm Dina Ruley-Hafey. I'm also a third-year member of the Ohio Youth-Led Prevention Network. And then I do work with a group called BATS, bringing awareness to students in my community, and I'm from Springfield, Ohio.
Thank you both. And like I said, I'm so excited to have you here for this conversation today. So we want to talk a little bit about the pandemic and how youth-led programs have looked prior to the pandemic and currently, and where we see them going. So first, Dina, how did youth-led programs or your group specifically look before the pandemic when there really weren't any public health restrictions?
I think most of the things that we did were more hands-on. We would get in bigger groups and work on larger projects. We could get closer together and talk about things and draw pictures and diagrams. And that's just not something that you want to do now because we're staying 6 feet apart. You can't come close to someone and talk to them and have that more of an intimate conversation when you're working on something.
So it sounds like there's a lot of, I guess, closer conversation, maybe both physically and, in just the depth of the conversation. You were able to maybe connect a little bit better pre-pandemic is what it sounds like. And does that include, did you all have a lot of in-person events prior to the pandemic where you were actively seeing each other?
Yes, all of our meetings were in person. Normally, some of them would even be over lunch or coffee, and we'd all sit and talk about what our next events were going to be, and most of those were also in person, normally in indoor settings, doing more hands-on activities, which is just something that you can't do anymore.
Yeah, that is that's so true. It's getting a little bit difficult. So Sam, going off of what Dina just said about how it looked pre-pandemic, what about now? What is youth-led programs or youth-led groups? What have those looked like since the pandemic started, as we've had some increased public health restrictions, some pretty intense, some maybe not so intense, but what does it look like, and what are maybe some of the barriers or obstacles that you've experienced?
Well, in particular with my home group, we have virtual and hybrid events. Our meetings are virtual. We are moving into in-person because we're really having an issue with engagement. We had 80 members at one point, and now we're down to 5. So it's just really getting people back into it, especially with the school year coming in. Hopefully that's going to help as well. But just, the level of engagement there with those virtual events, because they can sometimes be dragged out.
Okay, so it sounds like engagement has been a really big issue, where it sounds like your group had quite a high number of involvement pre-pandemic, and as the pandemic has gone on and you've moved to virtual, those numbers have dropped a little bit, which seems to be the case for many groups there. And Dina, would you say that that's a barrier for your group too? Is there any other barriers or obstacles that you've encountered? And is there any ways that your group has overcome those?
I I think definitely engagement is a very big issue. Our group was newer during the pandemic, so we were working on getting more people. And then obviously when the pandemic came, those numbers went down. And then in general, we had a really small group. And it was hard to grow as a youth-led group. But I think overcoming things like that, especially online, like I know with OALPN, we made shorter meetings. So instead of like the 5 hour long meeting that we would have in person, it was only an hour and a half online, which I think really helped. We were getting a similar amount of work done because like we had like a short amount of time to really focus on planning like the next events and things that were coming up.
So it sounds like you all have adapted a little bit, and I know you mentioned OILPN too, and how it was adapted a little bit to maybe make shorter virtual events, because I know Sam did just mention that sometimes virtual events for virtual meetings can drag on a little bit and maybe lead to that disengagement a little bit. Sam, is there any specific things that your group has tried to overcome some of the obstacles that you talked about?
Yeah, just really like including some fun activities that we can do over Zoom really just helps with that.
Okay, so adding an element of fun to meetings sounds like that is a good way to maybe get some more engagement back. And Sam, I know you mentioned that you're thinking about, or your group has already decided that you're going back to some in-person meetings or events this year. So what does participating in your program, or maybe you can share a little bit about what Youth Council, OILPN Youth Council is going to look like for this upcoming year?
So the Ohio Youth Led Prevention Network upcoming this year, we're going to be having the rally, of course, hopefully an in-person/hybrid event, which I'm so looking forward to. But in my home group in particular, we're going to be doing some more of those projects like community outreach, which we've not really been able to do, especially with the health restrictions.
Is there anything that your group is doing specifically this upcoming year to still adhere to public health restrictions, but also, start to integrate, those in-person events at all?
Just really with the social distancing, since we only have, a limited number of people at the moment, it's really not going to be a big issue in terms of that. We have a large area and space that we have for our meetings, as well as sometimes we've even had them outside if it's nice.
Okay, so maybe getting a little creative with space there, utilizing outdoor areas to have a more wide open space. I know the Youth Council, we were able to get you all some cool YLPN masks to wear during meetings and events. So it sounds like really creativity is where groups are going for this upcoming year then, to be able to still meet in person. So thinking a little bit into the future, maybe past these public health restrictions that we've experienced in this last year and a half or so, Dina, how do you anticipate youth-led programming to look in the future? Are there aspects from this past year that maybe have been beneficial that you would consider or maybe think should be kept as youth-led programming moves forward and as we move hopefully past these public health restrictions?
Yes, I definitely think that like hybrid, partially online, partially in person is a really incredible thing that we're able to do. And in the beginning, no one really liked it, but I've really grown to love it. Because I love prevention, but I have a really busy schedule with other things I do outside of it. And the fact that I can zoom into meetings if there's one I can't make, but I can come to half of it. I think that's an amazing experience for young people to get more involved and have more opportunity to be in youth groups, along with events like the We Are the Majority rally. If people can't physically go to the event in Columbus, they can still be a part of it through the hybrid online part, which is something that you never would have had the opportunity to do before this global pandemic that we've had. So I think that's a really amazing thing that we should definitely keep moving forward.
Okay, so building in that hybrid environment sounds like it would be really beneficial to young people specifically, just because you all are involved in a lot of different activities that you're doing in your home groups or just in school, and really adding that virtual element so that you all can still be a part of everything is going to be really beneficial. Sam, is there anything else that you think has been beneficial in this last year for you that you've noticed maybe that you think would be important to maintain?
Just really like in terms of like the flexibility with those hybrid events, like reaching out to more people, even like with the We Are the Majority rally in particular, people that, are far away up north or, able to participate that maybe weren't able to before.
Okay, so really similar things, right? That hybrid environment, maybe expanding reach a little bit. It's going to increase that reach for people. So awesome. And Sam, what are some of the aspects from this past year that maybe you think should change moving forward, and we really don't want to keep in place?
Really, just like getting back into the sense more of normal with the in-person events from the keeping the hybrid, but as well as having in-person events too, is just really like a key thing because engagement generally is much more higher with in-person events. Because even with young people doing online school, staring at a computer screen for an hour or two when they've already been on the computer for doing schoolwork, etc., is still difficult.
Okay, so you all have been living in a very virtual environment in every aspect. So you're saying that really trying to integrate some in-person experiences as much as possible would be a great benefit as we move forward, and maybe not just automatically choosing a virtual event. Dina, can you share maybe a little bit why like you feel that in-person engagement is so important? And then Sam, I'm going to ask you the same question.
I think it's just really important, along with, besides it's normally more fun, people want to get out and come to these really cool events. One of the big things I think of is actually the retreat from my first year in OILPN. I became very close with all of those members that year. Some of them I'm still very good friends with, even people who have graduated. And I feel like, especially with youth councils, creating that bond between the young people on the council is a really important thing that you can't do looking at each other on a screen. Even if your cameras are on, even if people are engaged online, you're not creating those like friendships and those relationships that I think make a better planning team and just a better team in general when you're working on these events and like prevention projects in a community.
Sam, what about you? Why do you think that having those in-person events, or at least trying to do some in-person meetings, is so important to young people?
Just really like when you're working on things, collaboration is much more easier in person than on a virtual format because you can't just push it off. You're right there and you're meeting them. And you're also, like Dina said, you're making friends as well. So it really just ties everything together with in person.
Okay, so better connection. You really feel like you're working more. You're working on things. You're able to collaborate a little easier when things are in person. Cool. That's I think that you all spoke to a lot of maybe struggles that us adults have had over this past year of trying to maintain youth-led programs, but also some of the struggles that maybe youth have had with staying involved and engaged in programs that have been mostly virtual. So is there anything, maybe one final piece of advice or a final kind of thought that you all have, whether it is for adults or young people that are involved in these programs, that you would share with everyone today?
I was just going to say that even though, especially for young people who are involved in youth-led prevention, even though it's very hard online and sometimes you're just like, it's hard, we're not getting stuff done, it doesn't feel like we're working well as a group, it's not going to last, this isn't going to last forever. And at some point we are going to be back mostly in person. I know when we just had our first OILPN meeting the other day, it was amazing to be back with everyone and it felt so good. So just make sure you're hopeful that all these things are coming back. And even if they don't and you're online again, we're learning how to work through it together.
What about you, Sam? Any final advice for youth or adults out there?
Just stay positive, because even within these virtual formats, we're still a lot of the opportunity and the privilege with technology that maybe we didn't have 10 years ago, 5 years ago, to even still come together. It's just a privilege.
Okay, so really staying positive, maybe working through some of the little twists and turns that may come along the way, but keeping a positive outlook, and really truly it sounds like embodying what youth-led prevention is all about, and continuing to move forward and utilize our resources and utilize the things that we have around us to continue to meet and still maybe get some work done to create some positive change. Awesome. Thank you all for sharing your thoughts today about youth-led prevention and where it's been and where we're going.
Thank you, Gina, for inviting us to talk to you about this today.
And I'd also like to thank you, Gina, as well, for the opportunity today.
Thank you for joining us today on the Ohio Adult Allies podcast. If you would like more information on our work, visit us at ohioadultallies.com. You can find more episodes on Spotify, iTunes, and other platforms by searching Ohio Adult Allies.